I was holding my second cup of coffee, watching the fog lift off the water, when I saw her standing at the end of my dock, hands on her hips like she was surveying a crime scene. That dock had been there longer than the HOA had existed. Hell, it had been there longer than most of the houses across the lake. But there she was, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight I thought she might swallow her own face. That was the first time I met Karen Whitlock, president of the Lakewood Bluffs Homeowners Association. Let me set the scene first. My name's Tom Rayner. I'm 68, retired steelworker, lived in this lakeside cabin for over 30 years. My wife passed a few years ago, God rest her, and the dock was always our quiet place. Morning coffee, evening fishing, watching ducks and fireflies. The lake wasn't mine, technically, but it wrapped around the back of my lot like an old friend, and nobody ever bothered me out there until Lakewood Bluffs popped up like mushrooms after a rain. They built fast, new houses on half-acre plots with lakefront views, though most of them could barely see the water without leaning over a railing. Still, they brought their HOA rules with them, like a swarm of clipboard-carrying hornets. Didn't take long before their board started poking their noses where they didn't belong. I wasn't part of the HOA. My property sat just outside their jurisdiction, grandfathered in, county records and all, but Karen didn't care much for technicalities. She came back the next morning while I was baiting my line, marched right up in her white sneakers, and said in that tight, sugary tone, "Mr. Rayner, we've had several complaints about your structure encroaching into Lakewood Bluffs common use space. That dock will need to come down." I blinked. "Excuse me." She pointed at the water like she owned it. "The lake is a shared recreational asset now. Your dock doesn't comply with Lakewood Bluffs shoreline aesthetics. You didn't submit a modification request." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Lady, this dock was here when your subdivision was just deer and pine cones." She didn't like that. Her smile vanished. "You're not exempt from our shoreline rules. We maintain this lake. We pay for its upkeep. You maintain it." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the algae removal you hired last year that killed off half the base?" That hit a nerve. Her nostrils flared. "You've been reported for unauthorized usage. The board will be reviewing penalties." She spun on her heel and stormed off, ponytail bouncing like it was personally offended. I figured that was the end of it. Some HOA blowhard trying to puff up her authority. I went back to fishing and ignored it. But then, 2 weeks later, I got a notice from the county. Alleged encroachment onto public waterway, filed by the Lakewood Bluffs HOA, was being accused of violating shoreline code. They even included a blurry photo of me on my own dock, with a red circle around the structure like it was some kind of crime scene. That's when I realized she wasn't bluffing. I went straight to the county office and had a nice long chat with Randy, the zoning clerk I've known for years. Turns out, the HOA had submitted a formal complaint asking the county to reclassify the dock as an unauthorized build. They were claiming the lake itself was managed and regulated by Lakewood Bluffs HOA bylaws, as if their shiny new rulebook could overwrite 3 decades of county land surveys. Randy just shook his head. "Honestly, Tom, it's a mess. But if they push hard enough, the county might investigate. You've got a right to fight it, but you'll need paperwork." Paperwork I had. Old blueprints, dock permits from the 90s, photos of my wife, and me fishing from it before half the HOA homes even existed. I went home and dug them all up, printed and organized every last page. Meanwhile, Karen kept pushing. Next thing I know, she's got security patrols cruising past my place, taking photos. One of her board members came by and offered to help me voluntarily remove the structure before enforcement escalates. Another neighbor, a guy named Jeff in house number 17, started leaving nasty notes in my mailbox. The lake belongs to all of us now. Don't be selfish. Rules are rules. It got under my skin, I won't lie, but I wasn't about to cave in to HOA tyranny. Then came the big escalation. I was hosting my grandkids for the weekend. We were out on the dock with tackle boxes and root beer, laughing and tossing lines, when a boat pulls up. Not just any boat, the Lakewood Bluffs patrol boat. 2 men in matching shirts with HOA logos pulled up alongside my dock and told me, in front of my grandkids, that we were in violation of community code. My oldest grandson, Eli, looked at me like I was some kind of outlaw. I stood up, slow and steady. "This is my property. You can take your pontoon and turn it around before I call the sheriff." They left, but the damage was done. My grandkids were confused. I was furious. That night, I called up an old fishing buddy of mine named Daryl, who used to work in real estate law. I told him the whole mess: Karen, the HOA, the dock, the county notices. He listened, quiet, then said one thing. "Tom, do you know who owns the lake?" I paused. "Well, I always assumed it was public, county managed or something." "Nope," he said. "A lot of lakes around here are owned. You should check the title history. If it's unclaimed, you might be able to buy the rights." That one sentence lit a fire under me. I spent the next week buried in records, county deeds, water rights, environmental usage codes. And you know what I found? The lake wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't even owned by the county. It was held by a defunct private developer, a shell company that built a retreat center back in the 70s and abandoned it. The legal ownership had defaulted years ago, with no claimants, and under state law, the rights to the lake, for usage, maintenance, and structural access, were up for acquisition. It took some maneuvering, but with Daryl's help, I filed a purchase application. It wasn't cheap, but it was within reach. I paid the fees, signed the transfer documents, and became the legal owner of lake usage and shoreline access rights. Not just for my property, for the entire lake. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I waited. Sure enough, a week later, I got another notice from the HOA. Final warning: dock removal, mandatory. Penalties imminent. Attached was a bill for over $3,000 in supposed HOA shoreline maintenance fees. That's when I delivered the hammer. I walked into their next board meeting, open to residents, held in the HOA clubhouse, with polished floors and lemon water pitchers. Karen was already at the front, gavel in hand like some kind of suburban judge. When they opened the floor, I stepped up. "I'd like to submit a correction," I said, "regarding the status of the lake." Karen rolled her eyes. "Mr. Rayner, this is not your forum. It is now." I dropped the manila folder on the table. Inside, certified copies of the lake rights deed, transfer filings, and a notarized statement of ownership. Karen froze. One of the board members leaned forward and squinted. "What is this?" "That," I said, "is proof that the HOA doesn't own the lake." "I do." Gasps, murmurs. One guy in the back actually spit out his cucumber water. Karen stammered. "This must be fabricated. There's no way." "Go ahead," I said. "Check with the county. It's real." "Which means your patrol boat, unauthorized. Your rules, invalid. Your complaints." I smiled. "Dismissed." Karen tried to regain control. Claimed I was abusing a legal loophole. Said the HOA would file for injunctive relief. I leaned in just enough to speak quietly but clearly. "You messed with the wrong fisherman." The meeting ended in chaos. Residents whispering. Board members arguing. Karen red-faced and flustered, storming out like a soap opera villain. But it wasn't over yet. Because what came next, the fallout, would send shockwaves through the entire community. You'd think slapping a legal deed on the table would have ended things right then and there. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOA types like Karen, it's that they don't quit when they're wrong. They double down. Within a week of that board meeting, I received a thick envelope hand-delivered to my porch. Not from the county. Not from a lawyer. From the Lakewood Bluffs Compliance Committee, which I suspect was just Karen, her friend Janice, and a stapler. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming I was interfering with HOA authority, followed by a new claim that the shoreline access rights I purchased didn't apply to navigational recreational oversight, whatever that means. According to them, their patrol boat could still operate and I could still be fined because the spirit of the HOA bylaws remained superior to individual ownership. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Then I did what any old rancher would do. I called the sheriff. Now, Sheriff Earl Lawson and I go way back. He used to fish off my dock with his dad when he was knee-high to a grasshopper. When I told him what was going on, he chuckled, but his tone turned serious fast. "They're sending threatening letters now," he asked. "Sounds like they're getting desperate." He agreed to come by for a visit. Not officially, just a friendly check-in. 2 days later, Earl pulled up in his county cruiser. We stood out by the dock, just like old times, watching the water ripple and ducks land. "Mind if I take a look at the paperwork?" he asked. I handed him the folder with the lake rights deed and transfer forms. He read it, nodded, then looked out over the lake. "Tom," he said slowly, This is ironclad. If they keep pushing this, they might end up liable for harassment, especially if they're sending what looks like fake legal notices. I raised an eyebrow. Think I should press charges? He smiled. Not yet, but I'll make a few calls. I figured that would put some heat on them, but Karen, she wasn't scared of the law. She was scared of losing control. A few nights later, just past midnight, I heard an engine on the water. I looked out from my window and saw it, the HOA patrol boat again, gliding slowly past my dock with a flashlight sweeping over the water. I stepped outside with my own flashlight, flicked it on, and pointed it directly at them. Private lake. I called out, "You're trespassing." The man at the wheel, the same fellow from before, a retired insurance adjuster named Brian, didn't even look at me. "We're conducting a safety sweep," he said, voice tight. "On whose authority?" "Number." Answer. They turned and motored off. The next morning, I sent a formal letter to the HOA's mailing address, informing them that further unauthorized activity on the lake would be reported to the sheriff, and if they attempted to set foot on my dock or interfere with my property again, I'd pursue legal action. The response came not as a letter, but as a public stunt. Karen called an emergency town meeting at the Lakewood Bluffs clubhouse, open to all residents affected by shoreline developments. She didn't invite me, but I heard about it through Jan from house number 23, who walked her dog near my place and always brought me zucchini bread. Jan said the meeting was a spectacle. Karen brought in a so-called lake management consultant from out of town who stood in front of a projector and explained how unregulated dock installations create safety risks, interfere with ecological balance, and undermine collective community trust. Then Karen took the mic and began pointing fingers indirectly. Of course, she never said my name, but she called me a non-compliant property owner who refuses to respect the shared values of Lakewood Bluffs. That night, my mailbox got egged. I'd been holding back, trying to be reasonable. But when your family photos get splattered with yolk, it does something to you. So I got serious. I called Daryl, my lawyer buddy, and asked him to help me file a cease and desist letter, a real one, backed by the county records, lake ownership documents, and a request for an injunction if the HOA continued trespassing on the water. Daryl was happy to do it. Said he hadn't had this much fun since suing a developer who paved a wetland. We had the letter, hand-delivered by a courier wearing a suit. Jan told me Karen turned purple when she got it, but it wasn't just legal pressure that hit her next. It was her own residents, you see. Not everyone in Lakewood Bluffs drank the Karen Kool-Aid. A younger couple named Luis and Amanda had just moved into lot number 44. They were quiet folks, but they'd been fishing off the lake with their 2 kids, and saw everything that had happened. Amanda, a lawyer herself, started asking questions like why the HOA was spending resident dues on patrol boats and legal consultants when their streetlights were still flickering and the playground was rotting. She and Louise started circulating a petition asking for a financial audit of the HOA's discretionary spending. Within days, it had over 40 signatures. Karen panicked. She tried to call a closed-door board meeting to shut it down, but by then, the whispers had turned to open murmurs. Some folks who once sneered at me now waved from across the street. Jeff from house number 17 stopped by to apologize for those nasty notes, said, "I didn't know she was lying about the lake. I thought you were just being difficult." I told him, "Next time, ask first." Still, Karen had one last card to play. She filed a lawsuit. Not against me personally. That would have cost her more than she could afford, but through the HOA, claiming that the transfer of lake rights was improperly conducted, that the board had a moral and implied easement over the lake due to its proximity and shared community use. It was laughable, but it meant a court date. Daryl prepped me well. We gathered every photo, map, record, and communication. I even printed out the emails from Randy at the county zoning office stating, in plain language, that my deed superseded all HOA claims. The day of the hearing, I wore my best boots and a clean flannel shirt. Karen showed up in a beige power suit, with a pearl brooch that looked like it hadn't seen air since 1985. The judge, a lean man, with wireframe glasses and no patience for nonsense, listened to both sides. Karen's lawyer, a fast-talking fellow with slicked back hair, made a big deal out of community cohesion and the psychological impact of unauthorized structures. Daryl stood up and handed over a single folder. "Your Honor, the lake in question was not, and has never been, Under the jurisdiction of the HOA, the deed was transferred legally under county law. The HOA's patrols and enforcement actions constitute trespassing and harassment. The judge took a long breath. "Mr. Rayner," he said, "how long have you lived on that property?" 32 years, sir," I answered. "And the dock?" "Built it myself in '94. Got the permits right here." I held them up. He nodded. "Court rules in favor of Mr. Rayner. The HOA is to cease all enforcement activities involving the lake and is ordered to pay court fees. Any further incidents may be considered criminal trespassing." Karen's mouth dropped open. She looked like someone had yanked the rug out from under her loafers. Outside the courthouse, local news had picked up the case. Small town, not much else happening. A young reporter asked me how I felt. I looked into the camera and said, "You don't win a lake fight with fake rules. You win it with history, hard work, and a little help from the truth." The clip aired that night. Karen wasn't just defeated, she was publicly humiliated. But the story didn't end there, because the judge's ruling triggered something we hadn't expected. A county review of all adjacent HOA developments, including the dock ban Karen had pushed 2 years earlier. That ban had forced several residents to tear down their little floating platforms and picnic landings, all based on the same fake jurisdiction over the lake. Now they wanted answers, and I knew just how to give them some. The day after I won the case, I woke up at dawn and stood at the edge of my dock with a thermos of hot coffee in hand. The water was still and glassy, early sun glowing on the treetops. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the tight knot in my chest. The dock was safe, the law was clear, and Karen, well, she was quiet. But in neighborhoods like Lakewood Bluffs, quiet doesn't mean peace. It means something's brewing. 2 days later, Luis from lot number 44 stopped by again. He held a clipboard, this time with more than just a petition. "Tom," he said, "after the court ruling, a bunch of folks want Karen out. The board's been lying about more than just the lake." I raised an eyebrow. "That right?" "Yeah, HOA dues are missing. Playground repairs have been delayed for over a year while she authorized spending for lake patrols and private consultants." "That tracks." I thought. Luis went on. "We're calling a special meeting to motion for her removal. We've got 60 signatures already." I smiled. "Need one more." He handed me the clipboard. "Even if you're not part of the HOA, your story is what woke everyone up." I signed anyway, out of principle. That Saturday evening, the Lakewood Bluffs clubhouse was packed shoulder to shoulder. Folding chairs lined the walls, and the air was thick with tension and bottled frustration. Karen stood at the front again, same pearl brooch, though this time it looked like it was strangling her. Luis presented the motion. Amanda laid out the financial discrepancies. Another neighbor pulled up projected budgets and invoices showing thousands spent on lake compliance initiatives that had no documented approval. Then they opened the floor. One by one, residents stood up, some timid, some angry. They talked about being harassed for lawn decorations, for painting fences without proper shade authorization, for putting out bird feeders, or, in one case, for having wind chimes that Karen claimed were a nuisance to neighborhood tranquility. Then came a voice from the back. "Why is the old man with the dock here?" It was Jeff, though even he looked unsure of himself. Before Luis or Amanda could answer, I stood up. "I'm here," I said, voice calm but steady, "because I was the first one she came after, and because I was the first to say no." Karen crossed her arms. "You don't even belong to this HOA." "No," I nodded, "but I've been here longer than this whole neighborhood, and what I saw happen, the lies, the bullying, the fake rules, that's not a community, that's control." Silence. Then someone clapped. One person at first, maybe Amanda, then two more. Then the room filled with the sound of residents, realizing they weren't alone. The vote wasn't even close. Karen was removed as president with a 73% majority. She stormed out, practically knocking over the refreshment table. The pearl brooch didn't make a second appearance after that. A new board was elected. Luis became president. Amanda handled the budget. They invited me to a neighborhood barbecue, even offered to let me submit ideas for a community dock policy. Voluntary, respectful, optional. I politely declined. I already had my dock, but I offered to help anyone who wanted to build their own, and I did. Over the next month, I helped 4 different families draw up plans, file permits, and build small floating docks on their property lines. Nothing flashy, just wooden platforms, where kids could fish and couples could drink wine in the evening. For the first time since Lakewood Bluffs was built, the lake felt like it belonged to the people living beside it, not the board that claimed it. And the real kicker, Karen tried to sue the HOA herself after she was ousted, claimed she was unjustly removed, and deserved compensation for damages to her personal brand. Her case didn't even make it past preliminary review, but the final twist, the poetic justice I didn't see coming, was what the county decided to do next. Because of the legal spotlight from my case, they began auditing adjacent developments for overreach of HOA governance. Turned out, Karen's HOA had issued multiple citations on land and easements they didn't control, including a small public trail she tried to shut down because it attracted non-residents. The county fined Lakewood Bluffs $15,000. The new board issued an apology. They also passed a resolution banning patrol boats, HOA enforcement on private docks, and any future board member from acting unilaterally on community matters without a full vote and legal check. One afternoon, I was sitting on my dock cleaning a reel when Jan came by again. She brought zucchini bread. Of course, she smiled. You know, Tom, we've lived across the creek from each other for almost 10 years, and until all this happened, we never really talked. That's how they like it, I said. She nodded. Not anymore. We watched the sun dip below the trees. A father and son fished from their own dock across the water, laughing every time the bobber danced. And I thought of my wife. She loved this place. Not just the dock, the peace of it, the way it sat still, even when the rest of the world spun itself into knots. That's what I was fighting for all along. Not just boards and bylaws, or noisy patrols and phony fines. I was fighting for quiet, for legacy, for the right to cast a line into the water without asking permission from a self-appointed queen in sneakers. So when people ask me what it cost to buy the lake rights, I tell them the truth. Less than I expected, and worth every damn penny. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild HOA tales coming your way. And remember, if they try to take your dock by the lake,